What is up, everybody? In this episode of the Quarters Podcast, we're going to break down the top prospects to watch for the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl, but we're going to be highlighting some players that are stock risers or fallers. We're going to do a little stock watch here. We're going to see some guys here that could really up their stock here in these big bowl games. I don't even know what they're called, the showcase games here, just to see kind of how they perform, how they do. And we got some fun ones on here. We already had pre-show Christian Williams just raking over one of his quarterbacks that he picked. But we're going to be talking about it as we go through here after the intro. All right, we did this kind of like a draft style here of guys that we kind of wanted to see as like, hey, whose stock are we really watching here as we go into it? So we're going to start with the Senior Bowl for me. I had the first pick, and I definitely went just fantasy heavy and just kind of, it's going to be fun to watch this as the week prevails. I took Jalen Milroe, Alabama quarterback. And I think, as we've done these mock drafts, we've talked about Jalen Milroe. Like we never have him in the first round of mocks. I still see him going top 10 in a few mocks these last few weeks, even after his performance against the Michigan team that was not great, threw too many interceptions, did not look great there. But I think the reason, when you pick him here, the reason why I picked him is because, man, he could go one or two ways here. He's got raw talent. If he can prove to coaches there, if he just gets one person to kind of really believe in that raw talent, his dual threat ability, his stock could rise. We've seen that happen. Now, we've also seen on the flip end, right? We saw Malik Willis's stock not rise. We saw Sam Howell get decimated at the Senior Bowl. Like the coaches did not like his interviews and all of that. And so from a Milroe perspective, for me, it's just, hey, what can this kid do? We saw him at the 2,800 yards, the 16 touchdowns, but he did have 11 interceptions. But on the other end, 726 yards rushing. He had 20 touchdowns on the ground. I mean, that's pretty good from just a rushing standpoint. So when you're thinking of just from a fantasy perspective, someone's going to buy into him at the back end of the first if he goes in the second round. Or let's say he goes in the first round. Now we're talking about a whole different kind of value system here for these quarterbacks. I think that's what makes it intriguing for me. I think that will he go out there and tear it up? I have my question marks on that. Like I'm not a Milroe truther by any means, but I think it's exciting. So he can go there, have a good week, and then maybe his prop, his value goes up. And then he goes to the combine, does it again. Now we're talking about maybe a quarterback needy team jumping in there and grabbing Milroe and believing him, right? Or for some people, like it's the Raiders, right? If the Raiders miss out on quarterbacks at the top, you're seeing them. That's who they're getting mocked to there. So I picked Jalen Milroe. Again, not because I think he's a great quarterback. It's just I think that it's going to be fun to watch that process kind of play out throughout the week. Christian, what do you think about that?
I mean, you mentioned that you're not a Milroe truther, and I think I probably would be classified as the Milroe truther of this podcast. I still have him as QB3, and the only reason I have him as QB3, this quarterback class sucks. So like you're kind of throwing darts. Spoiler alert, darts at that position after the first two, and I even think the first two are dart throws as well. But I mean, the main thing that I've always hung my hat on with Milroe and in my evaluation of him is, you mentioned it with Sam Howell. The interviews didn't go well. My understanding is that the interviews will go very well for Jalen Milroe. He's got great character. He's considered a leader. I am curious how this season will be explained because he's going to have some explaining to do. Some of the passing concepts that he had never run before, and maybe it was just a case of he didn't really fit that offense. And I think there were times where that kind of showed. I don't think necessarily that offense was. I think they needed Ryan Grubb, who departed the Washington. Kalen DeBoer has had Ryan Grubb for most of his coaching career. I think if Ryan Grubb goes with him to Alabama, we're talking about Jalen Milroe in a very different way. I don't necessarily know that the Senior Bowl is going to be a great opportunity for us as spectators of practice and the actual game to see those things. But hopefully we'll get some reports that the interviews are going well. He's making a nice impression with teams. It's just one of those scenarios where, like, okay, yeah, he's a great running quarterback, but this isn't really the environment to show all of that off. So I'm definitely intrigued to see what he's able to do. I still don't agree with him declaring in the first place, but here we are. I think we're just kind of hoping that he gets a little value spike and teams fall in love with him. I mostly see him as a second round pick, maybe even early third round pick at this moment. But this is the time for him to prove that he should be a back end of the first type of guy. He's a special athlete, man. There aren't many quarterbacks in the NFL that can do what Jalen Milroe does, and I think that matters.
Yeah, I mean, we saw game-changing plays from him his whole career, but we really didn't see the development on every down type plays. So just actually managing the game and continuing to develop, even with elite weapons around him and good offensive line play, decent running back play, we still didn't see enough development, in my opinion. So going to the Senior Bowl here, I can't remember if they're going to be coached by the Browns or the Giants, but either way, I think he's going to need to show a few things. He's got great offensive line around him, decent receivers. I think he could show out and make all the big plays you want. I do think it's a guy that should stick around for the game, though.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he better play in this game, and he better play well. Like I think that's one of those things. But if he does, like let's say he goes out there and he just kind of rolls and gets like those big runs, he scores those touchdowns, he's electric. I think that's what you're talking about there. Giants offensive coordinator Mike Kafka, and then Browns special teams coordinator Bubba Ventrone. Those are the guys leading it. So maybe he'll go to your Browns, Randy. You know, maybe with a second round. Not first, second round.
Really, the interesting for me will be do you know if he's on American or National?
Oh, I just know he's on the roster. I'm not sure what.
The same. I'm not sure if it's fully fleshed out.
I don't know.
The Giants running back coach is the American OC, and then the national OC is the Green Bay passing coordinator. So those will be kind of interesting to see which one he goes to, personally.
Yeah, they haven't separated out the rosters just yet, as we record this at least.
Yeah. All right, Christian, give me your guy.
I went with Armand Membou, the offensive lineman from Missouri. So a lot of these picks are fantasy heavy as we talk about these guys, but I did want to mention him because this was a guy that I got to pretty late in my process, and quite frankly, he's been rising up boards among industry folks. I've seen him go inside the top 10 in NBC's latest mock from Connor Rogers. Dane Brugler just had him, I believe, at 10 or 11 in his most recent mock draft. So this is a kid that is getting a ton of first-round hype, and this is the perfect environment. So kind of opposite of Milroe, Armand Membou is one of those guys that should take on those one-on-ones and be a beast. Now, this defensive line class is also really good, and so that's where we picked all offensive players here, honestly, as we go through this, not to spoil it, but this defensive line group, there were about 12 guys that I could have picked. Membou's one where you've got folks that don't necessarily believe that he has the length or the size to play tackle. I think we're going to really find out what his upside is. I think he can be an offensive tackle. I've watched him move. He's nasty. I think the length is not necessarily a problem. He reminds me a lot of Rashawn Slater coming out, to be completely honest. He's just a nasty player. And so we think about where Rashawn Slater went in the draft. This is one that when we get the clips of the one-on-ones, I'm going to be very excited to see how Membou does. There's a chance, though, like this is one of those where we find out, okay, he's probably going to be a guard at the NFL level, and then his draft upside goes down a little bit. So very, very intrigued to see really a lot of these edge rushers and defensive linemen against a couple of these offensive linemen, offensive tackles, which I know we're going to talk about another one here, but this is a kid who I currently have him as my OT3. So on my offensive tackle 3. And it's when we have guys like that end up at the Senior Bowl, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, really the only question with him, there's slightly technique stuff to clean up, but that's with every offensive lineman in this draft. But it's really just where is he going to play? Because right now, a lot of teams are going to have him as a great guard with a swing tackle upside. I think he has a chance to prove that he can play either no matter what. And he's going to have to prove it because, like you said, there's not only stud edge rushers, there's stud D tackles. So he's going to have to play against, piercing 3 techs, dominant face-up guys. He's going to have to do everything and he's going to show it out. I do believe him and my guy are going to have great weeks and really make their money.
Yeah, hey, I just like to point out that I have receipts for this kid. On July 6, 2024, I said Missouri right tackle Armand Membou is one of the guys who can rise up draft boards this season. It's one of the more well-rounded players in class. So I'll take that. I'm going to take that receipt there. Hey, look at that. You didn't know.
That's good stuff. I'm glad you shared that.
You didn't know I was a draft guy, but now you see how I kind of
we didn't know. But
Back
you're watching offensive linemen in the summer, you are fully indoctrinated into Randy and I's sickness over here.
Was not aware of your game.
I'm not gonna mention to everybody. Christian gave me that name, but we're just gonna stay out of that. Randy, give me your guy. Who's someone that you're looking forward to kind of watching?
Yeah, I'm going with Marcus Mbow, the offensive tackle, right tackle from Purdue. Played right guard and right tackle his career. Really good. I mean, 73 grades, 77.2 against the run, 68 against the pass, 3 sacks, 1 hit, 21 hurries, 25 pressures allowed, 97 overall efficiency. A very good year. Again, I do think he has a little bit of a lean frame and needs to get a little bit more functionally strong. I do think, he shows good IQ in the passing game. There's a lot of really good snaps. I mean, Christian even shared a congested clip of like 4 minutes of him really dominating anyone that gives him leverage or tries to lean against him. He's very good at hitting it with his hands, latching, ripping, pushing you off. If you give him any leverage advantage, he's going to dominate. I do think, those pure speed rushers and those, top level toolboxes have given him some grief. And that's where this 68 pass comes into play. Obviously, played pretty well against Ohio State, but those are more, toolboxy. It's power rushers. Against Penn State was getting ripped up, So I think those shows he showed good reps, but it shows some of the limitations. But the great things with him: quick, lethal, violent hands, great latch ability. Like I said, wins with leverage pretty much every snap. Even with, I don't understand what Penn State does, but all of their offensive linemen are basically standing up. And it's really annoying to me. So I am curious how that's going to work at the Senior Bowl to see if some of that gets shaken out or if that's just how he's going to play. I do think he can obviously win like that, but I'm not sure everyone's going to love that. I don't think he could go beat Kyler Murray's right tackle just because he's already taller than him in his stance. So, but everything else, good in space with great speed. I think he shows all the angles you want to hit in any kind of counter, any kind of screenplay. He's doing really well in that. Fits really quick on any kind of run. I think he's very dominant in the run game. Ideal, intensity, finishing, a run-dominated offense like the 49ers, I think he'd absolutely thrive in. Allows him to move in space and allows him to create, and then he's going to have to work in the passing game, but he can learn from the greatest. So you live there. But again, there are a few things I want to see tested out here. There's a couple good speed rushers at this class. Landon Jaxson as well, I think, can give him some fits. We'll see what Ohio State guys want to do here, and I think they could come and do some really nasty things against this offensive line class. But we'll see what happens. Either way, I think Mbow should be able to rise up fully into the first round. He's kind of in the fringe. He's a top 50 guy right now for most people. With this offensive tackle class, he's probably more of a right tackle for the future, but I think he can make a lot of money.
He plays like a boxer, man. He literally just you talk about hands and punch and things like that with offensive line play, and punch doesn't do it for me. He's throwing haymakers out there, and it's exciting to watch. But there's also definitely some technical issues. I have him at number 65 on my big board right now, so I definitely would love to see him go out there and show that he has the anchoring ability and the foot speed and things like that, where I didn't quite see it on film with him, but this is a good opportunity. Like we talked about, there's a ton of edge rushers that are going to the Senior Bowl that should give this offensive line a good challenge. That should be, we talk about the one-on-ones. Talked about them a little bit last week too with, some of the wide receivers or some of the corners. I think those are going to be fun to watch, but this year's Senior Bowl spectacle, I think, is going to be the offensive linemen versus those edge rushers and defensive linemen, defensive tackles. So definitely an intriguing player. I've seen him in the top 20 in a few mocks. I'm like, I think I'd pause there. I just think that's a big projection, but we're looking at a class with Cameron Williams from Texas getting this first round hype that I just cannot fathom, cannot understand. I would rather make a bet on Marcus Mbow to make that leap here at the Senior Bowl, instead of a younger Cameron Williams, who just struggled at times, especially down the stretch at Texas.
When you guys look, so just to go through it, Randy, or even Christian, whoever wants to answer this, when you're looking at the offensive lineman in a Senior Bowl or a Shrine Bowl or wherever you're kind of looking at, what is your, like, that's what you're looking for? Give us some insight of, like, hey, if, like, that is the type, because it can be misnomers, right? We talk about with wide receivers all the time. It's one-on-ones that puts a wide receiver in a very good advantage, especially if they're quick, like a Jalen and Noel, guys like that against corners. And corners, it's tough for them. Do linemen have that similar kind of, one-on-one with a defensive end, or how does that work when you're looking at offensive linemen? What you'd like to see?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's always so you'll see a lot of those highlights in like the high school camps and everything with no pads. And,
yeah,
the offensive linemen are at such a disadvantage in that regard. Those same drills where we see all the highlights and everyone getting hyped from a D end and an offensive lineman fighting in those, doing everything possible to not give up ground or ride to the outside. Here we get to see everything we want to see for the next level. Trevor Penning really got drafted in the first round because of the Senior Bowl and his ability to ride out the edge rushers and really cut back in with power and be dominant and ferocious in every single snap. That was a lot of his. The tape was iffy. He was obviously going to go back in the first, early second. It hasn't necessarily worked out so far, but Senior Bowl killed it for him. So in these drills, especially because we're going to see a lot of, speed edge rushers, power edge rushers going against offensive tackles, or, like Mbow and everyone else kind of go in and out. It's going to be really, with a good anchor in that kind of situation, not giving up as much ground as you want and trying to really adjust from what we've seen at tape. Like I said with Mbow, there's a few things that you saw on tape that he needs to really show that he can kind of give you the good reps that you want to see and be coachable in that regard. And I think we'll see it this week. So with him, it's getting off the ball, being in a better stance, being more anchored, better leverage, and not just waiting for them to get to you. A lot of times he's catching, and in these drills you can do that, but a really good edge rusher is going to use that to his advantage. So there's a lot of little things with footwork, foot speed, being able to rip and counter and just fight. Offensive line, defensive line, it is a fight every play, no matter what.
Yeah, I think of like Quinn Miners too, who I believe was named an All-Pro this year at guard. That's a guy who really vaulted up at the Senior Bowl because of his tenacity and his, every single rep. Even if he lost the rep, he was putting in 100% max effort. And I think when you have guys that are more developmental, like Mbow, or guys who have questions like Membou, you're kind of just looking for a little bit of confirmation that they have that level of floor, or maybe that there's more of a ceiling than what we anticipated. So foot speed's a big one, especially in those one-on-ones. But really, what I'm looking for is how do they respond when they do lose a rep, because they're not going to win every rep. And the guys who do win every rep, I can't even think of one off the top of my head. Maybe Darnell Wright a couple years ago, where he just like came out off the field after I think two days because he was just dominating so much. It's just that doesn't happen very often. So how do you respond from that? But also, that a lot of the technical stuff, because it's a very controlled environment. So obviously, that it's going to be a little bit different in games, but we have a lot of film on the game. So how they respond in this environment among peers too, like Mbow's going to go against edge rushers that, I know he had Penn State and he had Ohio State this year, but there's some good players that are at the Senior Bowl that might rival the best that he saw this year. So stuff like that.
Yeah. And like you said, with the technical on these one-on-ones, it is very easy from experience to get sloppy with technique and just go full aggression. And that's what you want to see not happen. You want to see the controlled chaos at all times with these offensive linemen and defensive linemen. And it's very easy for defensive linemen to just pure rely on their speed or pure rely on their power. You show everything.
Okay. just thought it was a good conversation, kind of, especially for some of the other guys that maybe don't know what they're watching, especially the offensive line. Okay, like we see all the highlights for the offensive guys because that's generally speaking like the skill positions. That's what everybody loves putting out there and putting those clips out there. And speaking of skill positions, we want to see clips of. I want to see Devin Neal from Kansas, running back out of Kansas, 5'11", 215 listed at. Again, I'm really excited to finally figure out what these guys' weights actually are. So we're going to see kind of where he lands there. But, Devin Neal should have came out last year, and we'd probably be talking about him like we talked about Bucky Irving. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, it was just similar prospect profile, especially depending on landing spot. Now he's in more of a crowded class, but, I mean, this kid just produces. Last 3 years, he had over 1,000 yards. He had one of his best seasons this year. He had 2 consecutive years with 16 touchdowns. So on the ground, that's been phenomenal. He had his best receiving year this year with 254 yards. He's one of my guys. I think that he's kind of going on the radar because of the top-heavy portion of this class. You're going to hear Genty. You're going to hear Travion Henderson, Judkins. You're going to hear Amari and Hampton. You're going to hear those guys. But then Devin Neal kind of just slips under there. But when you're thinking about his patience, vision, his ability to kind of start, and his quickness in open field, like things that go well, and he's versatile. He's a 3-down kid. I love that. And really, like, very low mileage runner, doesn't have a ton of volume on his legs. And I know most people will talk about it doesn't matter, but to me, it still does. But he's explosive plays out there, very balanced skill set. To me, and Christian loved this kid before he got injured. Rasheen Ali was not the prospect I don't think Devin Neal was, but Ali really set himself up for success last year before he got injured in the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Bowl. I think he was a Senior Bowl, right? So when you think that with Neal, he could do that too. Pass catching wise, he could be a giant riser there where you're talking day 2 after this week with everybody there, the coaching staff's there, especially with some of those teams. The Giants still need a running back. I know Tyrone Tracy, he's fine. But there's teams there that are still, I mean, the Browns could use him, maybe possibly another running back, depending on what to do with Chubb, those other areas. So that coaching staff could like him, have that 3-down backfield, and just say, hey, I like this kid here. So Devin Neal's my pick. I think he's someone to watch, especially in a crowded running back room.
Yeah. You talk about the teams that need running backs. So they're about 12. Yeah, 12 to 15 that need running backs, which is a good year to need one because there's a ton of them. I still really like Devin Neal. I think from a film perspective, he's one of my top 5 backs. I think some of the production numbers, the advanced stuff didn't quite hit the thresholds that I was looking for. Shout out Jay Stein. I sound like him on this podcast.
It's because he's old. He's old, 4-year guy.
Yeah, he's old, but also like some of the breakaway percentage this year came down a little bit. But that Kansas offense came down quite a bit too. And so while he had a productive year, that's not taking everything away from him. I do think that would knock him a little bit. But you talk about like what do we look for with offensive linemen at the Senior Bowl? Devin Neal's one where I think the pass blocking reps that we're going to get are going to be super, super critical for his draft capital. And then he's a good receiver. So I think he's going to show out in those types of drills when at the Senior Bowl. I think he's also one that should play in the game because I think there's an opportunity there to have a big game. So I still really like Devin Neal. He's down at RB10 for me right now, but in this class, that's still good. I want to say I have a potential NFL starter grade on him. So pretty darn close to NFL starter, honestly. And I think when you put him in a committee backfield, I think Neal could be the one from a fantasy perspective that we're talking about as, like you said, like a Bucky Irving type where, okay, he's with another back. We'll see what it looks like at the end of the season. And I think Neal could take over a backfield as early as late next year.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we saw better tape probably the last couple of years, but that's just like you said with the whole Kansas team. So I really want to see him just continue to show it. Like we've said before, kind of validate the points. I want to see the vision then in the burst that we've seen on tape, and the receiving game, and then to really nail down the third down potential back, just the pass blocking. Like Christian said, it's going to be vital for pretty much every running back at both events. There's only a couple I know are going to overperform in that regard.
I think because there's such that tier, like Christian just talked about, you really could probably rank running back 5 to 12 anywhere you wanted to, depending on, or some people have weird rankings where they got some other guys up at 5 and 4, which is fine. Like I think, but if that's the case, then little things matter. Pass blocking reps. Okay. How are we going to separate themselves there? And then what you hear about in the interviews too. I think that's always important. There's a lot of coach speak in that too, but like if you hear many people say, oh, he did great in interviews, that stuff, little things like that matters. And it could make the difference between a day 3, day 2 kid. And that means all the world if you're talking about fantasy football as well, or even a round 4, round 3 kid. Like those things matter in terms of where they're getting drafted and the landing spot there. All right, Christian, let's talk about the quarterback that you put on your board. But I don't know how excited you are about him. What are we talking about here?
Jaxson Dart from Ole Miss. I foreshadowed this earlier. If
we used to like Jaxson Dart. Did you forget?
I still do. So
right, just make sure.
So that's the thing. So I wanted to talk about Dart because I went back to the film and once again this quarterback class is not my favorite whatsoever. But Jaxson Dart has quite a bit of like. I wouldn't say that the tools really pop off every time you watch him. I think some of the arm strength stuff is just good, maybe not great. I think when he gets off platform, it can be good, not great. That said, I mean, some of the stuff that we've seen since his freshman year at USC, when, we talked about him very, very highly, Kevin, 3 years ago, however long, 4 years ago. We've been doing this a while. Some of that stuff is still there where it's like, okay, he can throw under pressure sometimes. Other times he's going to take the worst possible sack you could even fathom. So some of this stuff it's not really an environment where I think Jaxson Dart's on-field stuff is going to matter, but this is the opportunity for us to see how teams really feel about him. Mel Kiper now has him up at QB3. Mel Kiper also had Will Levis at QB1 at this point a couple of years ago, so we take that with a grain of salt a little bit here. But Dart has every opportunity to emerge from the Senior Bowl as the favorite to be, maybe QB3, but I think there's also an opportunity for him to maybe be in that QB2 discussion and maybe into the first round. I don't see teams reaching on quarterbacks as much as maybe we've seen in previous years, maybe even last year, even though they've all kind of panned out so far. But there's a chance when you start to look at what teams need quarterbacks and where they're kind of picking right now. Matthew Stafford is talking about thinking, or he's considering his future. And so the Rams might need a quarterback and they're picking later in the first round. Could Jaxson Dart have a Senior Bowl where we're talking about him as an option there? I think it's possible. He's my QB4 right now. He's tied with Jalen Milroe. I lean Jalen Milroe because of the crazy athleticism and what you can do with him on the ground. But Dart has his fans. I'm not quite as high as everyone else, but I think the Senior Bowl is an opportunity to maybe, open my eyes a little bit. I can't wait to see his miles per hour on his football. So everyone can say, you're an idiot. He does have a strong arm. He has a strong arm, folks. I know he can probably zip one in there among the best of them at this Senior Bowl. But I mean, Tyler Shuck is there. So maybe not. Tyler Shuck's going to throw 800 miles an hour. So everyone's going to get pumped about that. But no, I think Jaxson Dart has a great opportunity here.
Yeah, the only thing I'll push back in that whole thing is I do think his on-field play, at least in practice, we'll see what the game does matter a ton for his draft stock, simply because of coachability and playing within structure. Because those are two of his weakest points, I think. So, him fully listening to the coaches, unlike what we've seen in the past, like Carson Strong or, Malik Willis, once he got to the NFL, just not listening and doing what he wants and trying to prove a point. If he just sits in the pocket, plays in structure, goes along the reads, I think a lot of the times his offense was one read, maybe two, and then try and make a play with his legs. So if we could see him get to a third read, if we can see him just sit in the pocket, again, great offensive lineman at the Senior Bowl, you should be able to sit there. So, some really good receivers, good running backs. I think he can prove that he can sit in the pocket and make plays. He's got the intangibles. We just need to see structure from Jaxson Dart.
I've been back and forth with Jaxson Dart because I loved him at USC. I thought after his first year I was a little more nervous. He is developed. I will say the thing with what Randy points out, it does seem like he became, I think Kiffin did a good job kind of reining him in from a coaching standpoint of like getting him to listen, because there was talk 2 years ago that he was done. Like Jaxson Dart was out of Ole Miss and it was not that. And he really bounced back last year. I mean, there was like that, hey, maybe he's going to stay. There was some talk about transfer portal, whatever. And the thing that stands out, I mean, he had 180.7 passer rating. You can say what you want about that. But he excelled in deep balls, like 20 plus on PFF on deep ball throws. He was one of the best in the nation. And that really showed there. Now, offense definitely led to that. He had over 4,000 yards in the SEC. You saw the 29-6 touchdown interception. I think the biggest thing with me with Jaxson is that I always felt in big games he shranked. Like he never made that big drive. Like at Alabama, he did it multiple times where I thought, oh, Ole Miss is going to beat Alabama. Oh, Jaxson Dart came up short. Oh, and then Kentucky this year. I mean, they would have been in the playoff had it not been for that Kentucky loss. And he was not good. He did not elevate his team in that game. So I think that those are the things you get a little bit worried about. But he's only 21. He's still young, and there are teams that are going to bet on that. Like they're going to bet on that, those tools and that age, and say, hey, we can develop and coach him. And I like your point to like, hey, just draft him behind a guy that's going to retire in a couple of years. You get that development. It could be that next guy. We've seen it. I don't know how much we've seen that pan out. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. It just kind of depends. But that's the quarterback position as a whole. All right. Oh, go ahead, Christian.
I was just gonna say the only reason I say that like the on-field play doesn't matter a whole lot is because some of that is like 7-on-7s and like a lot of that stuff we're not gonna see the structure. I do think the game. I'll walk that back. I think the game will matter because then you're going maybe against a less cupcake defense in a real game situation where, yes, the big problem with Jaxson Dart to me is that he is a one read type of player that does not throw with anticipation. He's a see it and throw it type of guy at this point. Now, can he anticipate a deep ball? Yes, I don't consider that anticipation really at all. I think that Ole Miss offense was a crutch for him. And so if he proves that that wasn't as much of a crutch or he was just executing what Lane Kiffin wanted him to, but there's more there, kind of in the same vein as Bo Nix last year, where we did see some growth and that he could run a real offense and not just the Oregon offense, which was halfway real last year, a little less real this last year. But I think that would definitely benefit him. The Browns are there, and the Browns are rumored to love this kid. So I think we might get some crazy rumors coming out of the Senior Bowl, too, for what it's worth.
Well, that's good. We've never seen the Browns ruin a quarterback before. I'm happy he's going there. I'm excited for that one. All right, we're going to the Shrine Bowl now. So those are all the Senior Bowl guys. We have some more going to the Senior Bowl, but we want to throw the Shrine Bowl. Hey, that's the Deion Sanders Bowl this year. Every single Colorado player, including Shiloh, is heading away over there to Dallas. All right, Randy, who you got? You got Shiloh Sanders on your board or no?
No, unfortunately, I got a guy that's probably going to cook him a good amount. Ja'Cory Brooks, wide receiver from Louisville. I almost said Arizona because of the Cardinals. 78.3 grade, 79.7 receiving grade. And then 61 catches, 93 targets, over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, 363 after the catch, 15.1 ADOT, 7 drops, a little bit to clean up there, 125.4 rating when targeted. He gives you the good size, prototypical type X receiver with the length and the catch radius. Showed a lot of talent in those contested catch situations, strong hands, some drops, not bad, but still could improve. It just needs to be cleaned up a little bit. Good at route running. I do think he shows a lot with the head fakes. He does box out a lot. I do think he needs to develop an actually full tree at the next level. He tends to win with the athleticism and physicality. He's really good on the in-breaking routes, but past then, it hasn't been a ton there. I think he's really good after the catch, showed promise as a sophomore at Bama, but injuries and, playing time made him switch over to Louisville this last year. So we need to get some clarification on that injury history. I do think that'll, if we can get some good notches on that, if we can get some good testing, good interviews, and we can see some good play on the field, I do think he can pretty much lock himself into day 2. Every bit of the testing will just confirm a lot for him, just because on tape you see some good speed and then you see some just mixed bag. So I really want to see what he's going to end up running, what he's going to end up doing in every single kind of testing. Not at the Shrine Bowl, but you get to see a little bit more in this kind of open play style. There's not a lot of competition, I'd say, for him at the Shrine Bowl. Zy Alexander, Kobe Bryant are really like the ones that pop off the list. Like I said, Shiloh Sanders is there. The best quarter there, Siobhan Revel, isn't going to be doing anything. He's just there for interviews. So that's really, I do think there's a couple good corners that I listed. Even Jordan Clark from Notre Dame, I think, can give you some good reps. So I want to see some good things, but he really only has competition in like Nick Nash that we brought up, I believe, a couple weeks ago at this point, or Kevin did. It's literally them two against those corners, and who's going to make the most out of this. You have some good quarterbacks here, including Shador. I don't know if he's going to end up actually playing the game or not, but I do think he can make a statement here. And just, there's a reason he's at the Shrine Bowl and not the Senior Bowl. I get that, but I do think he can make a lot of plays and make some money.
I've always been a fan of Jacory, and then I graded him out, and I just, he wins with physicality, but also he's like under 200 pounds. And I'm curious to see how far under 200 pounds he is, to where that is a little concerning. So he reminds me a little bit of Dontavian Wicks when he was in college. I think there's some of that where Wicks probably was a better go ball receiver. And I think a lot of what Virginia did for Wicks was just run go balls because we have shit quarterbacks. So Louisville did too. They have, Tyler Shuck, aforementioned. So I think I think he has an opportunity though, because there is all the explosiveness that made me love him as a recruit, and even back when he was at Alabama, there were signs that this kid had a ton of talent. I think there's just a lot of untapped potential with Brooks, and like you mentioned, the DBs aren't great there. I think there's an opportunity for him to really, really show out. There's a few safeties that I think could actually give him some problems. Jabbar Muhammad from Oregon is also there. I think that could be an interesting matchup, but I think Jacory should win that in jump ball situations. Muhammad's a little bit smaller. So good player. This is one where I could see him getting the promotion up to the Senior Bowl if we still did that. I don't think we're going to be doing that based on the new schedules. I think the Shrine Bowl fixed that and kind of revamped their schedule. But I like Brooks, man. And, he's my wide receiver 14 right now. But, there's an upside there for sure.
Brooks has always been kind of a big game guy too. Like, he's always looked really good in the games when they needed him to go, kind of a go-to guy there. To your point about the guys going to the Shrine Bowl from a receiving standpoint, I think Trey Harris might be the only other one I'd throw in that category with those two that you mentioned. Other guys out there just not kind of. Jacory has a chance. He could be wide receiver 1 there when all said and done because of what he can do on the field. He's interesting. It's funny you brought up that point about he plays physical, but he's sub 200. And I see that too. Like, I'm like, man, this kid is really physical out there. But at times, he does get bullied a little bit, but he bounced back because when he's at Alabama, when he's a sophomore, many people thought he was going to be that next great thing. Like, people were talking about him being the next great Alabama wide receiver. Injuries, whatever happened that junior year was weird, kind of off the team, whatever goes on there. And he bounces back at Louisville. So that's what you'd like to see. He did bounce back. And so having those 1,000 yards, 600 receptions, and he was a go-to red zone guy. He scored touchdowns. So it is interesting. The quarterback play at the Shrine Bowl, though, boys. We got
Shador, right?
Kyle McCord is there, though. So Kyle McCord is there. So if Kyle can sling
Max
it,
Brosmer.
Yeah,
Max Brosmer.
Max Brosmer. But Curtis Work, I don't think is throwing, right, because of his knee.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
Peyton Thorne got an invite. Who invited that guy?
Peyton Thorne got an invite, and then Cam Miller from North Dakota State got an invite too. So like when you talk about like quarterback play, we'll see how that kind of impacts these guys. But overall, I like that pick. I really do. I'm going to swing back over to the Senior Bowl. And I'm going to talk about a kid that's kind of going up a little bit out there in terms of rankings. That's Savion Williams, TCU wide receiver. Now, he's an older prospect, so the spreadsheets aren't going to like him very much. But this was his 5th year out in college, 6'5", 225. This year, from just a standpoint of production, 60 catches, 611 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Also has 51 carries, 322 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And let me tell you, boys, he's already getting the Cordell Patterson bump up there. I mean, people are basically saying he's Cordell Patterson. I've been hearing it everywhere when you're talking about kind of like, prospects. I know the stock exchange guys have talked about him. They're big believers in Savion Williams. They like his tape. And he has a chance. I think he has a chance here to kind of be that versatile kid. And it'll really just going to depend on like, all right, with that athleticism, that size, that speed, the kind of diversity of like just playing running back, wide receiver, will a team look at him being that next offensive weapon? Like, hey, we could use him in this way. Is Arthur Smith going to draft him, right? Whatever Arthur Smith, if he's still the Steelers, is he going to get him, use him in that role? I think we've seen players do this. I think Savion could do that. But he's very raw. I think his route running remains pretty raw. I think he has, drop issues as well. Inconsistency, definitely. But if a team drafts him for a reason, they can put him in a Patterson-like role. I like him there. It is a pretty heavy wide receiver group, though, there at the Senior Bowl. So he's going to have to really showcase something to kind of stand out among these guys.
Yeah. So he's very explosive. I think that's the main thing that you see on film. Like whether it's via his releases or within his route stems, there's just so much juice there, and it's always been there. I've low key been a fan of Savion Williams, and I'm kind of upset that I didn't really put that out there. I put him pretty high in our rankings on the Devy Royale. No one said anything, and I didn't say anything, so I was like, he's like 50. But I remember watching Quentin Johnston, and I was like, oh, who's this other kid with dreads that is rocking it out on the other side at times? And it was Savion Williams. That said, the hands are a big problem. So the Senior Bowl will be a good opportunity for him to show off that he has more consistent hands. It must be a TCU thing. With Jalen Reagor, Quentin Johnston, Savion Williams, all with massive drop issues. I think in this scenario, though, I think there's a chance that he goes out and dusts these DBs. Now, you did mention the wide receiver group. It's going to be hard to stand out unless he's just dominating, but he's also one of those guys that can go up and get a jump ball. He's one of those guys that in a game scenario, the Cordero Patterson comps are fine, like accurate to me. Like I see it a lot. I think that he can be used in that way. So wherever Arthur Smith lands, I think that, I mean, if he's back with Pittsburgh's stupid, but wherever he lands, I think that's where Savion Williams should land. And then he has a new young Cordero Patterson to take carries away from good running backs. But I actually have him higher than Brooks. He's my wide receiver 10. And I think, I've seen some crazy takes on Savion Williams. So, I'm not quite as high as everyone else, but good player that I think should have a good Senior Bowl here.
He's going to need it. Just to stand out. I mean, we've talked about this a good amount where everyone's kind of locked in on, I'd say, the top 3 to 4 receivers for a lot of people. But that, like we said for running backs, that 5 to 12 could be different for everyone. And, that's what's so big for everyone for this Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl week. Even the Hula Bowl last week, just any kind of plays you make, anything you can do to just help out your stock for any team sport to move up. And you can just make such a big difference. And this is a very good secondary coming to the Senior Bowl. Like you said, maybe not the best route running necessarily. So maybe the one-on-ones can give him slightly fits, but if he can just make a few plays, that's all he's going to need.
Yeah. All he needs is that Moss catch over some poor corner out there. And then people are like, oh my God, who is this athletic freak? And then you're talking about him kind of rising the boards. Just takes like that. It just it's quick like that. Speaking of athleticism, fast. Christian, give us your guy at the Shrine Bowl.
I mean, that's the word, right? Fast. Jaydon Blue from Texas, kid who declared, and a lot of people were shocked, including me. I didn't think that he should. In watching watching the broadcast film this year, I said, oh, well, if Jaydon Blue can't take over this backfield with no CJ Baxter, I think we're looking at a guy who should return and run with CJ Baxter next year. 6'0", 200. So a pretty solid frame. But man, oh man, is this kid fast. This is an environment where he can excel because he's just going to be dusting dudes. He hit 22 miles per hour in a game this year. It was the fastest time by, I believe, anyone in college football, or the fastest miles per hour among anyone in college football this year. So, Travion Henderson getting a ton of hype as a top 3 to 5 back right now. I think Jaydon Blue runs a faster 40 once we get to the combine because, man, is he fast. And I think he's actually pretty good between the tackles. That was the question. From the broadcast view, I was like, okay, how much of this is Texas just being more dominant than the teams that they're playing? And there are times where he creates for himself. And I think it was a little shocking. I think he has one of the best receiving skill sets in this class and can really highlight that in this type of environment. I think the footwork is okay. I think the patience is okay. I think he's a fast player that really wants to get out into the open field quickly. But man, the burst is great. The ball security is not. So we'll see if that continues to be a problem at the Shrine Bowl or beyond. But when you look at, spreadsheets are going to love him. I can't wait until you talk more with Jay about this kid, because an over 11% target share. His yards after contact per attempt is up 3.83. His breakaway percentage was a little bit low, which is a little shocking, but a pretty high dominator as well, because he scored so many touchdowns for Texas this year that there was a time where he was kind of the only one scoring touchdowns for them. So decent yards per attempt. There's a lot to like, and he's young, early declare. So, the analytics folks love that. So he's a top 5 back for me right now. And I was shocked to learn that after I graded him, but he is my RB5. And I think that when you have a player with that much speed, you have to look at a Devon Achane, who I think showed similar stuff and ended up being a day 2 pick. Blue to me has a really, really nice opportunity to say, I am among the top 5 to 10 backs in this class, and I should be drafted before round 3 ends.
Yeah, to me, it's a guy that I think he should have went back. Like you said, I just think he could go back and really solidify himself as probably the top back in next year's class. But I'm sure he's hearing good enough things that he's coming out. That's just plain and simple. Like you said, it's all speed and wanting to go to the outside. Obviously, the third down potential is incredible. So I want to just see that continue. But like you said, I want to see the footwork and the patience. I want to see the technical aspect of a running back at the Shrine Bowl. And then that really just dominate him on boards for me. Obviously, I was hoping you weren't going to say the Devon Achane, because I can't even imagine them drafting another running back. But I do think he's going to, he's going to kill the RAS score. 3 teams that are always looking at that, Vikings need a running back, Browns, like Kevin said, could use probably another one. They really could just use another upside back in this team, especially with some burst. And then, you're telling me he's not going to be the best handcuff and RB2 for the Colts? Come on. It's just another team. Him with JT could really outshine everyone. But see, here's the thing. Only one of those teams is really a starting spot next year, and that's probably the Vikings. And that's kind of the issue, just because I just don't see the patience for like the 49ers or any of these zone schemes where we need to see him read and react and use that burst instead of just try to get at the outside.
Yeah, so I would put another team on your radar, though, because there are times where I'm like, it's a little Jahmyr Gibbs-ish out there. He's not quite there yet. He's not quite there. But Jahmyr Gibbs was special, and I don't have his grade even close to where I had Jahmyr Gibbs. But Ben Johnson going to the Bears now, I think they're going to try to build something similar to what the Lions just built in their rushing attack. I think you can't really do that with DeAndre Swift, unfortunately. And I think Jaydon Blue could be a nice little fit as long as they get a back to eat up carries in the Montgomery type of role. But that's another team where, like, I think you put them in a 2-back committee, a pretty heavy 2-back committee. Even the Broncos have mentioned they need multiple running backs. They don't really have one that they like, it seems. So, like, is that a team where you can use some of that speed for Bo Nix and the yak opportunities? I'm just intrigued by how do teams feel about him? That's my main question, because him declaring was very, very shocking. I guess. And then I watched the film and I was like, okay, yeah, teams probably love that he runs 8 million miles an hour. That's my guess.
I mean, he could have the fastest 40 time. He has a 4.340. I'm pretty sure it's clocked somewhere. I saw a clock somewhere out there. So, I mean, he's going to have probably one of the fastest 40 times of running backs. And I don't care what anybody says. When teams see that, that's going to bump them up a little bit. My favorite spot for Jaydon Blue, and I talked about it like preseason. I wrote a whole article on Jaydon Blue coming into the season, and that's the Texans with Joe Mixon. I think he could look pretty good in that system. I think especially in Slowick's system, what they're trying to do. The biggest thing for him, and I wrote about him. I did a Shrine Bowl like preview that you can find actually at our Substack, and I'm talking about him, and I said the weaknesses for me. Sometimes his size struggles between the tackles. Like sometimes if his offensive line doesn't blow out guys, it's hard to see him and find him. Like it's hard for him to find holes. And the other one is fumbling. Like you cannot be on the field. That's why they took him off the field and he was losing to Trey Wisner out there. He's losing so much volume is because Sark didn't trust him. Like he was just at times the head coach of Texas was like, I can't give the ball to Jaydon Blue, but he had those big plays like against Clemson, the 77-yard touchdown. You saw even against, Ohio State, 2 touchdowns. Like you saw the explosiveness there. So I think that's part of it. Like he has a ton of, I'm surprised he went to the Shrine Bowl. I'm very surprised, maybe because it was a late kind of whatever declaration or whatever, but they're still taking guys. That's the one that shocks me probably the most in terms of where he went there. All right. Randy. Go ahead.
Do you think teams care about fumbles as much as maybe analysts do?
Yes, I do.
I think teams think they can. I think teams think that we can fix them, right? Like we'll take it out of there. So maybe not as far as like draft prospect, but if you fumble a couple times in the season, you're done.
Because I mean, I was looking at it, and I wish there was more research out there, and it probably is out there somewhere. But like Braylon Allen had some fumbling issues. There were times where, Kyron Williams in college had it his junior year, and then he's kind of had it at the NFL level. And like Melvin Gordon had fumbling problems when he was in college, and then it kind of translated, but it didn't matter. I know it's a little bit different for a scat back type of guy or just like a speed back, but. I think that's something I'm going to look into. Do teams care about fumbles? What's the threshold that they start caring? He probably hit it for what it's worth because he fumbled a lot this year.
7 times. 7. I think.
Yeah. It was pretty rough. He fumbled twice in like multiple games, which is problematic. But I'm just curious as to what the threshold is for folks.
Sounds like a good article.
And that's why I said yes, because of the threshold he's hitting. He has as many fumbles this year as Ja'Cory Brooks had drops. So that's not good.
Yeah, that's bad.
All right, Randy, to cap us off here. Who are you taking for your last pick?
Cap us off, another fantasy position, but I still think that's exciting. Harold Fannin Jr., tight end for Bowling Green. One of the more prolific players in this draft class. Again, it's at the MAC level, so everything's with a little bit of a grain of salt. But the last few years, we've seen some, remarkable people coming out of the MAC. So 95.9 offensive grade, 96.3 receptions grade, 89.9 drop, 75.2 run block. I think it's important for tight ends to put that in here. 117 catches on 150 targets for 1,555 yards and 10 touchdowns, 873 yards after the catch, 7.5 ADOT, only 4 drops, and 123.8 rating when targeted. Versatile weapon. Obviously I share a document with Christian, so I see his versatility score. I know mine is going to be a little bit higher, probably a point higher. Simply because, he was played everywhere, 31.7% in the slot, 26.2 in the slot at wide, and 38.3 in line. I think that shows that you can play anywhere. Again, grain of salt, MAC. I think this week is where we're going to see a lot of that tested, especially the blocking grade. And I think that's where he's going to make a ton of money simply because, again, with these edge rushers and with even these linebackers from a blitzing perspective, same with running backs. If you can just pick up and make some plays and just show your willingness and tenacity in that regard, you're going to really make a lot of these teams happy, especially the coaches. These staffs, if they have a tight end that can block and then can be out wide and be an actual weapon, I think that'll be huge. So strong hands, good tracking at the point, weapon after the catch, obviously, with that many yards after catch, a matchup nightmare in the right scheme. I do think he can be considered a bit smaller for an inline tight end. However, he's basically the same size as Brock Bowers, Kincaid, and all the other weapon versatile tight ends at the next level. I do think if he's going to be inline more for that kind of scheme, we're going to need to see a bit more functional strength. Just because we saw some things not go so well again at this level. So if we can see some of that cleaned up at the Senior Bowl, and then obviously the next level, everything will be good for him. And I do think he needs to develop a little bit more of a release package simply because he didn't need it. So especially against press, I do think he struggled at times in the MAC, and that's not great, but he was still prolific.
Yeah, this is the one player that I think that run blocking grade is bullshit. I watched him play, and I'm like, I just don't. You can't tell me that this kid was one of the a better block. Let me rephrase. Tyler Warren had a worse run blocking and I believe a better pass blocking grade than Harold Fannin Jr.
I don't really care about the pass blocking,
but I wanna put out there that when you watch the film for Harold Fannin Jr., I can pull up 3 straight games where he's just blowing run blocking assignments exquisitely. He's doing it in fantastic form where he is falling over his feet. He is attempting to latch on to an oncoming linebacker, and he just can't get out there. I just don't. I question that grade more than I've questioned really anything from Pro Football Focus, because I think generally they've done a pretty good job with that. But when I saw that, when I opened up everything to start going through grades and everything, man, it did not match the film, and that's the first time this year. That said, and that's what brings his versatility down, I think he's an incredible receiver. I think when you're talking about a receiving weapon tight end, I think Fannin has it. I think he's a good route runner. I think the releases are a little iffy at times. I don't think he's the same level of athlete as Loveland or Warren or Mason Taylor or Terrence Ferguson or Oronde Gadsden. And so I think maybe we get a little bit. I mean, I still have a good athleticism grade on him for what it's worth. But I think the 40 time is going to really scare people because I think there are times where, yes, he's good after the catch. I think he's creative after the catch. He's more in the Isaiah Likely mold in that regard. I think he can generate some things, but he's not pulling away from anyone. Interesting player, though. Interesting player. He performed really, really well against Penn State, and I think that matters a little bit. So we'll see. This is a really, really good opportunity. A very good player to talk about on this show.
Do you think he runs a 40?
I think he might be wise not to. Especially if he would go before Loveland and Warren, because they go in alphabetical order, I believe. Maybe for tight ends they split into 2 groups. I can't remember. I just don't. I think the other pieces of his athleticism are good enough that if he skips the 40, I mean, people will have questions about it, but it's better than posting a 4.7, 4.8. Yeah. Like high 4.7 is kind of what I expect. That said, like the explosiveness, the jumping, I think is going to be there. And so he could pull an 8+ relative athletic score without the 40 potentially. So in short, I think he does run it because I think he's a competitor, but I don't think he should.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's running low 4.5s, but you said, everything on the field as an athlete is everything you want to see. So that's the thing. The yards after catch is ridiculous. Again. But, I mean, even against Penn State and some of the better competition in the MAC, he was open at all times. Even in the contested catches on bad throws, would make a play and then just get rid of that defender and keep going. So I just think we'll see a lot of good things from him, and I think he can just make so many spectacular plays at the Senior Bowl that really takes away the tension from everyone else.
For what it's worth, Isaiah Likely same exact situation where on-field athleticism was all there, and then the explosion was there, and then the 40-yard dash was not. It knocked him in our grades, and he has become a very good NFL player. So I might not even touch Fannin's because the on-field athleticism is really good.
This, and to your point too about the Senior Bowl tight end room, man, there's some fun tight ends in this going on. In this, like, there's a battle. Elijah Arroyo from Miami's getting a little bit buzz. I saw him get mocked in the 3rd round recently. Gavin Bartholomew from Pittsburgh, he's not a bad tight end. Now he's more of a 12 personnel inline blocking guy, but that's going to be fun. Jake Briningstool, my guy for some reason. CJ Dupree from Alabama. Harold Fannin's there, like we just mentioned. Terrence Ferguson, people some have him as tight end too in the class. Jackson Haas from Georgia Tech. Gunnar Helm, that's Christian loves Gunnar Helm. He is all about that guy. Just kidding. He's not a big fan, but he's there. Like Malachi Matavio, I think is how you say it. I used to love that kid. He was at Oregon before he transferred to UCLA. You know what? He's
a good player. You
got to watch this kid because he is extremely talented from like an athleticism perspective. Like, he doesn't have production at all. This last year was a little bit better, and UCLA does produce some tight ends. Like, you've seen that kind of historically with them. And then Mason Taylor, like, this is a loaded tight end room. A lot of fun to watch at the tight end position. This is probably my favorite position in the running backs for like the talent wise in there. A lot of fun in terms of like what you're looking for, but this tight end class can make some money. I think they can make some money this week for the Senior Bowl as we kind of go through there. And Fannin is one to watch. I was thinking while you're doing comps out there, like Kyle Pitts, but not really. I think, it's just a different kind of athlete, I think, with both those guys there. Fannin's kind of a mixture of kind of the top guys at the top of this class too. Like, he's interesting, but you can't just throw out the Penn State game because you're looking at it, you're like, man, he produced against one of the best defenses in college football. I mean, that's something to know, especially when Bowling Green had no one else. Harold Fannin was their offense too. So from just a production standpoint and just from defense is keying on him, he did a fantastic job there. So we appreciate you guys tuning in. Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl's coming up. This is the official start of draft season now. Now we're getting into it. Now the college football season's over. Finally, it took forever. Now we're kind of looking into it and we're saying, okay, now we're diving into kind of NFL team needs. Stick with us here. If you like the NFL draft, we appreciate you guys. Hit that like and subscribe button. You can find the podcast underneath. Go check the podcast out. Download that. Get on your feed. You can listen to 30 minutes here, jump over to the podcast in the car, and stick with us for your draft coverage. We're excited to bring it to you this year in this offseason. It's our first offseason here at the podcast for this, so we're excited there. So we appreciate you guys. We'll check you guys in the next show.